Hello, my friends, and welcome to this episode of the Steve Beaman Show. Today, I really want to follow up on comments I've gotten about previous videos, so I want to unpack the truth about what socialism is, what capitalism is, and how the safety net can be misinterpreted as socialism. So stay with me as we journey down the Steve Beaman Show.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
In a world of uncertainty, where business, freedom, and the future hang in the balance, one voice rises with clarity, experience, wisdom, and conviction. This is the Steve Beaman Show, the voice of the independent American.
Well, hello and welcome back, my friends, on this Tuesday, the 7th of October, 2025. We're going to be going down a path that I started the other day talking about socialism and how it is being lied to the American public, especially younger people, by the media, politicians, and academia on how it's beneficial. So today I want to reset a little bit and look at the definition. So I want to look first, what is socialism? And we need to understand this because the word gets thrown out all the time, and people need to understand what it is. But simply stated, socialism is state ownership of the production of society. So grocery stores, restaurants, factories, those are owned by the state. Where in the United States, private companies are owned by individuals, in a socialist state, those companies are owned by the state. The thinking being that the state can better allocate the output of those than the private economy can do. Well, in reality, nobody in the United States has been talking about real socialism until Mandami. And Mandami and his friend up in Minneapolis are talking about taking over private companies and running them as state institutions. Well, that will not work here. It has never worked in the past. It didn't work in the Soviet Union. It didn't work in Cuba. It didn't work in Venezuela. It didn't work in North Korea. And it won't work here. The reason for that simply is that it flies in the face of human nature. Humans want to experience growth and more. They want better of themselves and better of their surroundings. When you enforce socialism, you destroy that motivation. It's the idea of a bakery that's owned by the state. There'll never be a new recipe. What's the possible incentive to do that when it doesn't benefit the person? So socialism destroys incentive. It destroys the entrepreneurial ethos that's built the United States. Let's switch a little bit. What is socialism not, though? Socialism is not putting high taxes on a capitalist system. Where you still have free markets and you have privately owned businesses, a government putting in and imposing taxes on that does not make it socialist. What it's doing is using the capitalist system to build a safety net. Now, that safety net, we could discuss whether it's beneficial or not. I would argue in many cases it's not. But the fact is, we're not doing socialism, we're doing capitalism with a high tax rate. When we look at things like the universal basic income or national health care, Medicare for all, that's not socialism, that's capitalism with a very high tax rate. Now, again, we could argue over and over the benefits of that, but let's not miss our terms. For Mandami to talk about socialism is socialism, and there's no such thing as democratic socialism because socialism by its nature devolves into tyranny. What happens in a socialist system when nobody wants to go to the grocery store? Well, what happens very simply is that they force people to work. They force people to do things because the sectors that are run by the government don't provide the consumers what they want. In a free market, consumers are the power. Consumers dictate where the companies go. If people didn't buy Teslas, you wouldn't have Elon Musk. They must like the product. In a state-run system, they don't care what the consumer wants. They want to do what the state sees as efficient. So it blows up. In this country, though, we're talking about increasing the size of the social safety net. Now, I have a problem here, and the problem is because in reality, we can't afford it. We are some $35 trillion in debt in this country at the federal government level. And I want to show you a chart real quick that shows where the wealth is held in this country. Because I've even done programs on the idea of a sovereign fund or trying to monetize our wealth. Let me take a look at this with you. What this chart shows you is where the wealth is held. The one on the left, the red, the deep one, is the federal government. The federal government now, if you take all of its assets and all of its liabilities by normal GAAP accounting rules, is about $100 trillion in deficit. That's bad. They have literally $100 trillion in the hole. If you look at states, they're not much better. I mean, they're less by percentage, but they're still in the red. They're not wealthy. The wealth in the United States is held by the green bar, by the people. We're the ones who own the company stocks. We own the farms. We own the businesses. We own the houses. We own the assets of the country. What was interesting to me in looking at that is when I looked at the amount of land that the federal government has, it has 650 million acres of land, about which 580 million acres of it are not public parks. I thought, and it was an idea I had, that if we monetize some of that, maybe you could kind of go at the debt. The reality is there's not enough debt there, or not enough land. The 550 million acres have an estimated value of, I think the number is about 5 trillion. It's just not enough. So we can't monetize the land to make enough. Where can we get enough to supersede that need for the government to make money? A Medicare for All plan is estimated by the left, the right, and everybody else to have about a $35 trillion cost over 10 years. It's about $3 trillion a year. Where do you get that money? What's happened in the U.S. is the U.S. government gets the money from two sources, both of which come out of your pocket. It borrows the money, which creates an interest payment, which you're paying for, or it devalues the dollar through inflation to pay back the debt at a lower price. Both of those are paid by you. Well, where are we going to get the additional $3 trillion a year? You can say, well, let's tax the rich people. I've done those numbers. I've looked at them from high and low, from confiscating the wealth above $1 billion to going back to the 1970s tax rates to taking the cap off Medicare. If we take the cap off Medicare, for example, and go back to the 1970s tax rates, do you know in aggregate we raise about $1.1 trillion a year? Now that helps, but that's not going to get us out of this debt problem. So taxes aren't going to get us there. In addition to the fact that when you draw a dollar out of the economy, it doesn't perform as well. If we want to look and say, okay, let's take a look at this. On the left here, you show the value of a dollar put into the private economy. On the right, you show the value of a dollar in the hands of the government. Now, the reason the dollar in the private economy is more valuable is people and companies can do four things. We've talked about this before. They can spend it, save it, invest it, or give it away. Spending, saving, and investing are good things. They build the economy. Giving it away has a one-time cycle through the economy when the person spends it, but it's a one-shot wonder. When government takes that money, it puts it into that, let's call it the giving category. So you're spending the money one time, but that's all it does. It doesn't compound as fast as investing, saving, and building wealth with that money, which is what the private sector does. So spending the money in the private sector has about a 6 or 7% annual return, where in the government it's a 1.5 to 2% return. That's why you can't build an economy based on the government. You have to build it based on private citizens. And as we build this debt, we're putting more and more of a burden on our citizens because the interest payment now is greater than the amount spent on national defense. No country has ever survived that when the interest on their debt is higher than national defense. So we have to reverse this. The question is, how do you do it? And I think that gets into the size of the social safety net again. I don't think we can afford Medicaid for illegal people going to hospitals. I don't think we can afford a single payer Medicare for all system. We don't have $3 trillion. I'm sorry, maybe there are things you'd like to do. And you could argue we take defense from 4 or 5% of GDP down and we use that money. That's a fair debate. And you and I should debate the good or the bad of that. But this isn't a socialism versus capitalism issue. If it weren't for capitalism, there'd be no money to spend. So let's accept the fact that the capitalistic system generates the wealth, and we tax it then to give the social safety system. But that's not socialism. Socialism is what Mandami wants to do by taking over the ownership and operations of an enterprise. That won't work. It's not even a debate. It's never worked. It won't work now. But taxing, okay, you can tax, and to a point, it won't break down. In fact, I looked at some numbers recently, and I was looking at a situation in which from 1900 to 2000, the government, state, local, and federal, grew from about 10% of GDP up to, by the end of the century, 43% of GDP. That's a huge leap in the size of government. Now, where did they get the money to grow that big? Well, they did it really by three things. They borrowed it. We now have $37 trillion in borrowed money. We kept interest rates artificially low so that borrowing was cheaper, and the Fed has been the master at that. And the third thing they did is they devalued the dollar. They inflate. We've had inflation. Those things are what keep this GDP growing, even though the government is taking 40% of it. Well, what you're wanting to do, if you want more of a federal safety net, is you're wanting to increase that role of government. The problem is it won't work because the economy has to grow in order for there to be money to pay any of these benefits. Right now, the big expenditures in the government are Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. Those are the top three, followed by interest on the debt, and then defense. We're putting ourselves in a position where there isn't a solution to this outside of adjusting the Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security programs. But people don't want to do that. You have to start adjusting those programs. One of the things to adjust is in Medicaid. Instead of being a blanket forever program, have it be means tested. If you can work, if you're an able-bodied person, you shouldn't be on Medicaid. It wasn't designed for that. Similarly, Social Security wasn't designed to be a 25-year retirement plan. When people got that program in the 30s, life expectancy was 65. Now life expectancy is 80. We need to adjust the estimated retirement age up. We have to do it soon, because otherwise we're going to put ourselves in a position where there are no solutions. I don't want to see inflation because it hurts the lower and middle class. I don't want to see interest rates run up because that hurts home ownership, cars, business, and everybody else. I want to see us sustain this liberty and freedom we have and continue to build on those 35 million independent business people. And the way to do that is to grow the economy. I go back to this chart. Where do you want to put money? In the private economy or in the government economy? That's the question we have to answer. So it's not socialism that we're talking about outside of Mandami, and he is a sea change in this debate. When you look at Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders, they're too dumb to understand what it is. What they're looking for is a great big social safety net. They're looking to try to make capitalism better by limiting the size you can get. I did, by the way, a number. I looked, if you confiscated all the wealth above $1 billion, and you said nobody should have more than $1 billion, if you confiscated it, it raises about $4 trillion one time. Now that would help. We could either pay down our debt or we could, bump up social programs and have more of a safety net. But what have you done when you wipe that out? The markets would be in complete disarray. And how do you do it? Is one person not allowed to own $1 billion or more? I don't even know how you do it. But as a one-time, one-shot wonder, you do more damage than you did good. So we have this problem that you and I have to deal with. And I think we can just throw out the argument that we need to look at socialism. For those of you who say you don't know what you're talking about, go back and study history. It is absolutely ridiculous what's been done there. But I think we can fix it if we look rationally and say we need to reduce taxes, reduce government intervention. We need to build the small business entrepreneurial ideal in this country. You know, if you're especially in your early years, starting a business is a daunting endeavor, no question about it. But you can do it, and if you do it with creativity and hard work and smarts, you end up becoming one of the wealthy people in the country. Most American millionaires are made off of self-employment. And that can be in real estate investing or technology development or secretarial services or HR services or waste management services. Pick the industry. People made it in all of them. Nobody thought fast food could make you a millionaire until Ray Kroc did it. Nobody thought garbage waste was so profitable until ServiceMaster did it. I mean, nobody thought you could make a bunch in candy bars until Milton Hershey did it. There's example after example after example of where people started with an idea and made a living off it and made a great deal. Henry Ford, remember, started in his garage. He tinkered to make a car. He wanted a car that everybody could drive. Before you know it, you have Ford Motor Company. So we have this issue that I want to just clarify again. We're not talking about socialism outside of Mandami. We're talking about capitalism with a high tax rate. And historically, and most economists would agree that about 43% is the top of the line you want to go. The reason for that is you start to tax above that, you start to destroy incentives and affect people's behavior. And by the way, for those of you who say, let's go back to the tax rates of the 70s, where we had 70 and 80 and 90% tax rates after the war, the fact of the matter is nobody paid that. Nobody. They didn't because you could deduct everything. So the person with a 90% tax bracket on that marginal next dollar just deducted it down and deducted it down. Your car loan, your restaurant, eating out was deductible. Everything was deductible. So nobody paid it. When Reagan flattened the tax code to 28% in the 80s and threw out all the deductions, revenues to the government went up because more people paid more taxes. So the 90% tax rate wasn't as good as everybody said. Reagan's 28 made more money. There's less incentive to cheat, if nothing else. So I think my argument would be, and my suggestion would be, we keep tax rates low and simple. We keep regulation to a minimum. And we grow our economy to build a rising tide lifts all boats mindset. We build a nation of victors, not victims. And what we're seeing, and especially on the left right now, from the Mandamis and the Elizabeth Warrens and the Bernie Sanders, is building a nation of victims, fully dependent on the government to live a moderate life, if that. I got into it with somebody on TikTok who said capitalism has never led to wealth like you say, it's created poverty. Capitalism never created poverty. There are poor people within capitalism, but our poor people are better off than 90% of the world. So do we have poverty in this country? I'm not suggesting everybody has it well. Some people do suffer. But there are social safety nets to help them. In much of the world, that doesn't exist. So capitalism isn't the problem. The problem we have is that we need to build the economy. And the more we take money, I go back to this chart. The more we take money out of the private sector, the slower the growth rate we get. Now, I've also talked to you a lot, and I've looked at the structure of our debt. And this is a pie chart showing where our debt is owned. Most of our debt is that blue, and that's individuals. We own it through mutual funds, retirement plans, and all the rest. We own the government debt. That orange is the really bad one. That's the debt owned by outsiders, people in China, Germany, Japan. That's the one we want to really watch. The gold is money owed to ourselves. We borrow Social Security money and spend it. The other is with the Federal Reserve. But if you look at that, that's the structure of the debt you need to be really, really wary of. Now, when I come back, I'm going to start migrating some of these shows into entrepreneurship because I want to get off this idea of the capitalism, socialism thing. I think you get it. I think you understand it, and I don't know that there's a lot more that needs to be said. But we want to make sure we understand the terms as we get into discussions with people. So socialism, that's the Mandami effect. It'll fail. It's inevitably going to fail. Capitalism with taxes to provide a social safety net, that can work. It has worked. But you and I have to decide what price we're willing to pay for that. For every dollar we put into a social safety net program, we get less growth. It's a full Baloff equation. So I want to thank you again. And as you go through, if you want to visit Steve at stevebeaman.com, send me a note with your questions, or visit my website at stevebeaman.com. Look into our webinars, our masterclass programs, the books that we have, all of which are designed to provide real help for real people. I want to thank you again. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the show, and we'll be with you tomorrow. Have a blessed day.